Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to trace one of the most incredible physical transformations in the entire history of tech. We spend so much of our time just interacting with Google software, typing in the search bar, swiping around maps, talking to their AI, that it is super easy to forget that the cloud is actually a physical place. So today we're going to explore the complete history of Google's physical footprint. We'll track how they evolved from a scrappy, bare-bones underdog into this massive, globe-spanning empire of data centers, hardware manufacturing, and custom AI infrastructure.
It really is a staggering question when you step back and think about it. How exactly did a company that literally started out operating from a tiny 7-foot wire cage become the world's most advanced manufacturer of specialized AI tech and consumer electronics? Well, it is an amazing chronological journey of extreme scale, ruthless efficiency, and the ultimate realization that if you want to build the world's best software, eventually, you've got to build the factory itself.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1. The 1999 Corkboard Closet.
Picture this, it's 1999, and early Google employee Urs Holtzley goes to visit their original server space. He definitely didn't find sleek, pre-built professional machines. Instead, founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin had taken this completely wild DIY approach. I mean, we're talking 86 hand-installed cooling fans just kind of crammed in there, sagging motherboards propped up on cheap plywood, and hard drives mounted on raw plexiglass. They even used literal corkboard for insulation. At first glance, it looks like an amateur's fire hazard, but it was actually a brilliant stroke of engineering born out of absolute necessity.
All of this incredibly janky hardware was packed into a tiny 7 by 4 foot cage. That is just 2.5 square meters. They were renting this little closet inside an Exodus co-location data center over in Santa Clara, right next to eBay and down the hall from Alta Vista. At the time, they were only running about 30 PCs. And you have to remember, bandwidth was incredibly precious back then. They were paying a steep $1,200 a month for a single megabit. Larry Page actually had to hustle and wheel and deal with the sales reps to get a discount, basically arguing that their incoming web crawler traffic wasn't straining the facility's outbound bandwidth.
Co-founder Sergey Brin was super upfront about all of this. He freely admitted, quote, "We were very cheap. They improvised their own external cases, even making their own custom ribbon cables so they could connect 7 drives at a time." The whole philosophy here is absolutely crucial to understand. The technical design for Google Search was built entirely on tolerating multiple hardware failures and just optimizing around them in the software. Instead of buying expensive, highly reliable individual parts, they built a massive system that was redundant at the machine level. It was the ultimate hack to maximize computing power per square foot on a total shoestring budget.
Moving right along to Section 2, Scaling the Data Center Empire.
So, that shoestring budget phase? Yeah, that definitely couldn't last. By the mid-2000s, Google was actually facing a massive crisis of success. Between 2008 and roughly 2014, they saw a staggering 50-fold increase in their aggregate data center traffic. Traffic was literally doubling every single year. This was being driven by the explosion of remote storage, huge data processing demands, and a bunch of new interactive web services. The traditional data center networks of the era just couldn't handle this kind of explosive, unrelenting growth.
Google hit a major fork in the road here. They could take the easy route and just buy traditional pre-built rack-mount servers from big vendors like Dell or IBM. Or they could stick to their 1999 ethos and build their own high-efficiency commodity hardware. Well, they boldly rejected the big vendors. No way were they handing over the keys. They demanded total control over their environment. So they designed their very own custom-built commodity x86 PCs and eventually even engineered their own high-efficiency power supplies. The result? A higher quality, much better performing setup that saved them an absolute fortune.
To solve the massive networking bottleneck tying all these custom machines together, they shifted to what's known as close topologies. Now, instead of relying on those really complex, decentralized routing protocols that most networks used, Google realized something smart. Their data centers were single operator and totally pre-planned, so they could just use a centralized control mechanism. By deploying these multi-stage close topologies made from basic commodity switch silicon, a massive project they dubbed Jupiter, they scaled their capacity by 100 times over just 10 years. It allowed for networks the size of entire buildings.
Which brings us to Section 3, Betting Big on Hardware.
Now, controlling the data center was really only half the battle. They realized they also needed to own the physical devices we use to access the mobile web. And man, it has been quite the roller coaster. In 2011, they made their largest acquisition ever, dropping $12.5 billion on Motorola Mobility to supercharge Android. But just 3 years later, in 2014, they pivoted, selling off the handset division to Lenovo at a huge loss because they realized the smartphone market needed a completely different focus. Then, in 2017, they brought top engineering talent from HTC in-house, really doubling down on their Made by Google vision. And you know what? That long-term, stubborn investment finally paid off, culminating in the massive success of their computational photography powerhouse, the Pixel 9 series, hitting 10 million devices by 2026.
Of course, as they scaled up this consumer hardware business, the actual physical geography of their manufacturing had to adapt big time. Facing all sorts of global trade pressures, rising labor costs, and the absolute need for a resilient supply chain, Google started shifting Pixel production. They actually took over an old Nokia factory in northern Vietnam. It's a region with a super experienced tech workforce, and it served as the perfect low-cost springboard to grow their hardware ambitions outside of China.
All right, on to Section 4, Engineering the AI Factory.
Today, Google's hardware focus isn't just about smartphones or basic web servers anymore. It has aggressively shifted toward hyperscale AI manufacturing. The contrast here is just profound. Think back to 1999, when Google was running on those primitive trays holding a single chunky motherboard and a basic Pentium 2 CPU. Fast forward to 2026, and they're deploying their 7th-generation AI-specific Ironwood Tensor Processing Units, or TPUs. These aren't off-the-shelf parts. They are incredibly advanced custom chips, perfectly co-designed from the ground up with Google's software frameworks like TensorFlow, specifically to crunch billions of operations for massive models like Gemini.
And the efficiency gains here are just staggering. Get this. The new Ironwood TPU is nearly 30 times more power efficient than their very first cloud TPU from back in 2018. 30 times. This really proves the immense compounding value of Google's long-standing obsession with hardware-software co-design. When you are the one writing the code and you also design the exact physical chip that runs it, you unlock a level of performance that standard, off-the-shelf parts literally just cannot match.
And to meet the downright incredible computational demands of the AI era, Google is pushing its global manufacturing base even further. They are actively diversifying their supply chain right now to assemble these ultra-high-performance AI servers directly in places like India, working alongside global partners. What started in a closet is now a massive, multinational physical logistics operation dedicated entirely to feeding the AI engine.
Let's wrap things up with Section 5, Sustainable and Adaptive Infrastructure.
Housing millions of high-performance servers requires an unimaginable amount of physical space and power. So how on earth does Google do this responsibly? Well, instead of just pouring fresh concrete everywhere and building from scratch, Google cleverly reimagines historical landmarks to drastically reduce their embodied carbon. For example, they've transformed a 150-year-old flour mill in Dublin into a workspace. In New York City, they completely adapted Pier 57, which is this former shipping terminal built on giant floating concrete blocks, into a stunning multi-use space. And in Sunnyvale, they renovated an old 1960s mainframe office building, heavily utilizing recycled materials to hit some of the highest sustainability certifications on the planet.
But I've got to say, my absolute favorite example is their data center in Hamina, Finland. They literally took a closed-down paper mill and retrofitted the entire thing to house their servers. It runs on 98% carbon-free energy. But the best part? They actually use the factory's historic industrial water tunnels, which connect directly to the freezing Gulf of Finland, to naturally cool the massive amount of heat generated by those servers. It is just a deeply tactile, fascinating example of how the invisible cloud completely relies on highly physical, repurposed real-world infrastructure.
And that brings us to the end of our timeline today. From a tiny 7-foot cage insulated with cheap corkboard, all the way to sprawling retrofitted paper mills cooling custom AI silicone with raw seawater, it really leaves us with a pretty provocative question to ponder. Decades from now, when the history books are written, will Google's enduring legacy actually be the search algorithms and AI models they coded? Or will it be the staggering, colossal physical factories and global infrastructure they had to build just to make that software possible? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope it completely changed the way you view the cloud.